So, we're doing a complete series on property investment opportunities in South Africa. And today, in this video, we're talking about property stokvel opportunities. Hi, I'm Yolanda. I am a wealth coach and a financial advisor, and it is my goal on this platform to give you easy, actionable tips, content, and strategies that you can use to manage your money well and to build generational wealth. And today, we're specifically talking about property stokvels. So let's see how property stokvels fit into the various property investment options that we have in South Africa. So in our series on property investment and strategies for beginners in South Africa, we have done tons of information that you can check out. Firstly, we spoke on REITs, and you can check that out on the top left-hand corner of this video. All right, we also spoke about property exchange traded funds as well. You can watch that video and the various comparisons that we've done on the top left-hand corner as well. Also click on the playlist, the property playlist that we have created for you, so you don't miss any of the information that we put out in this property investment series. So we're going on to unlisted property right now. In this video, we spoke to Silendile of Sasikizwe Property Stokvels, and that's what we're looking at in today's video. All right, so we see where everything fits in now, but I don't know much about property stokvels. And I spoke to Silendile from the Sasikizwe Property Stokvel, and she broke down the property stokvel opportunities that are available to us in South Africa. So let's jump into that chat with Silendile. All right, so Silendile, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Yolanda. I'm feeling great. Thank you so much.
It's good to have you here, and we're brought you on specifically to talk about property stokvels. We're actually doing a series on property investments in South Africa, and I'm giving the folks the various options that I came about. And when it came to property stokvels, you came up, and I had to have you on the show. And tell us your journey in the property sector.
Okay, so I started investing in property at quite a young age, really. In the first instance, it was helping out at home because my mother had back rooms. So, I grew up in an environment where, I got used to the concept of, you put tenants in and they pay you, and, that's additional income for the family. Okay. So that's where really my property journey really started. And then also when I started working, I rented for a bit and I thought, this doesn't make sense though. Like, why am I paying somebody else's bond? So let me rather get my own unit, and rather, pay that, because sometimes the difference between the rent and the bond, it's almost similar,
it's tiny,
so yeah, I mean, so that's why then I considered, actually, let me just rather bite the bullets and make other sacrifices and start my own property and buy my own property. So I did that. At the age of 23, I got my first property. Okay. And then after a while, it was a 2-bedroom, and this was around the 2008 mark, where the economic crisis hit, and I found that the interest rates were rising, and I was like battling to keep up with the bond payment. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, but I've got a 2-bedroom and the other room I hardly ever use. So why don't I sublet it so that somebody else can come and live with me and help pay the bond? So that's what I did. I then sublet the room. I mean, people nowadays, it's called Airbnb in your room. I mean, I suppose that's where the whole concept started with me, where I had the space in my house and I thought, let me rather put somebody else in there that can pay the rent. Yeah. So after that, I actually realized, this whole property thing and putting landlords and tenants, that's like cash flow that can help you out when you are in trouble and all of those things. And having had the background at home where we did have, what they call back rooms, it just made me realize that it's something that I could get into. And that is when I actually started now looking at properties for investment purposes. And that's when I then bought my first property that was purely for rental purposes. And then I just sort of from then on grew from there. And so at some point, I got a couple of units, and then I obviously couldn't get more bonds and whatever, because now, I had maxed myself out. Yes. And then one day, like, I was on Facebook and I saw someone saying, hey guys, do you know this? These random groups, if there's so many of us here, if we could all put so much money together, we could do this and this. And I thought to myself, that's such an amazing concept. Yes. It's actually true, and I took a screen. I'm like, we do something like this. And then, okay, let's investigate. How do we do it? And then we started seeing, at the time, there's lots of around property, whatever. okay, let's see which one we can join. Search about which one was the best one for us. And at the time, we just found it so complicated. We didn't understand what was going on. We thought, you know what, let's just rather do our own thing, because this is just, it seems a bit overwhelming, you know.
Okay.
And so yeah, so that's where then, you know, my journey started with just that Stokvel that I started with like close friends. And then now I'm actually like in a much bigger property Stokvel that is not just within friends. It's like, you know, it's anyone is welcome to join. So that's my journey in property and property Stokvel.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the Stokvel. How does it function? How do we join? What our returns are going to be like if we do join your property Stokvel?
Okay, so Stokvels are different, right? So before you join any Stokvel, you need to understand what is the objective of the particular Stokvel,
Yes.
and you know, how does it work? What are the returns and all of those things? So it's quite important that you get a grips on that. So in our Stokvel, we've got two investment options. We've got one where you essentially provide financing or funding for other property investors. So essentially, we're like the bank, if you think about it that way. So let's say, for example, you're a property investor and you want to buy a property and it's a student accommodation, right? So you will go to the bank and the bank will give you the bond, right, for the property. But you may need to do additional things onto the property, such as maybe optimizing it, adding additional bathrooms or
Yes.
whatever.
Okay.
Really provide you with that kind of funding. So we then come in and provide that bridge financing to help property investors, you know, their property, depending on what it is that they need. Obviously, with the security being the actual rental from the property. And then our second option is an ownership one, where we buy properties and we own them ourselves, and that is done through a trust, which is called Sakisizo Property Trust. So the properties are bought in the trust, and then the members become the beneficiaries of that trust. So those are the two investment options.
Okay, so as an investor, let's say we go with the trust option. What are my rentals like? What's my return?
Okay, so the first option where you're purely a funder, the one is fairly straightforward because the interest rate is agreed upfront. You know, what is the interest going to be on the loan, and what are the terms, what is the payback period, and. So that's fairly easy. We state that upfront. And then the second option, where in the case where we become the owners of the property, so what your returns are going to be are a function of the rent income that we collect, the expenses on the property, and then so it's not straightforward to different what your returns are going to be. It's going to depend on how much rental are we able to collect. You know, maybe in a month we need to do maintenance. If it's a student accommodation and there's no students, it means there's no income coming in, or something along those lines. So it will depend. So it's not a straightforward answer in terms of what the returns are going to be. Whereas in the one where you become a funder, you know upfront that this is a loan at 10%, 15%, 18%, 20%, whatever the case might be. And then that way, you know, and then you also have a period in which your funds are being utilized, and then at the end of that period, those funds are returned back to you. Whereas in the case where you're an owner, it's not so straightforward because your funds are literally in that property. So if you want to get out, it means that we need to get the property valuated and somebody else needs to buy your share out. So it gets a bit more complex. So depending on, you know, what your preferred strategy is and what kind of investor you are you in it more for the long haul, or are you just looking for short-term investments with fixed returns? So those are the options.
All right. So let's say we're making money in the trust option, the second option that you guys have available in the Stokvel. In terms of my income and taxation, how would that affect me?
Okay, so it's two ways, right? So remember, the Stokvel is not a tax entity, so the income is taxed in the hands of the individual. So in the instance where, for example, we're paying you interest, it means that the Stokvel itself doesn't interest. Individual they will need to declare their interest to SARS. Okay, in the instance of the trust is an entity, so the trust needs to pay tax. But if we're using the conduit principle, it means that the tax is actually at the hands of the beneficiary. our members can nominate their children, their partners, or whatever, to actually get their payouts and all those things. So if, let's say, for example, you're a high-flying executive and you're like on the high end in terms of your tax bracket, you can nominate that your child get the payout, and then your child will be then taxed at their tax rate. So obviously a child, I think, probably won't pay tax because they've got no income, so they're starting at a zero base. So the trust has got that flexibility that you can nominate a beneficiary and then they get taxed at their marginal tax rates.
Okay, and in terms of estate planning, if I were to die, do I leave my portion, or how do I nominate my kids, my husband, to become a beneficiary in the trust that I've invested in?
So the beneficiaries to the trust are the members themselves. It's their spouses and their children.
Okay, so but if we keep like when it comes to property, it's a nice platform for building generational wealth. So if a portion of that goes into this trust or the stokvel that you guys have set up, then I want my children to have it, and then I want my children to pass it on to their children, and that's how we want to build it. So like if I pass on, then it passes on to my kids. Will they be able to pass it on to their kids? Can I list the trust? Can I put it into my will to say that, okay, my oldest child will be a beneficiary of my youngest child?
Okay. So I would say it depends, right? At which stage you pass on. If you pass on while the funds are still in the stokvel, because we raise funds typically every quarter, right? And then we take the money out. So if you pass out and the funds are still in the stokvel, they're not yet in the trust. So it means that you just have to give us a letter of authority, nominate who you want to get your payouts, and that can then be paid directly into your estate or to whoever your executor is. But once it's within the trust, like I was saying, that you've got it. So the trust automatically nominates the beneficiaries as the members themselves, their spouses, and or their descendants. So automatically your children and your spouses are included. So there would be no need for necessarily a will per se, because by default your children and your spouse are beneficiaries of the trust.
Okay. Why would I invest in a property stokvel as opposed to shares, ETFs, or unit trusts, or property like a real estate investment trust?
So absolutely, there's no reason why you have to do either or. So some of our members are actually investing in ETFs and shares and whatever. It's just an alternative way of investing, where you want to feel that you're part of something, and you're doing it with like-minded people, and like stokvels are something that we grew up understanding very well, and all of those things. So there's absolutely no reason why you don't have to do ETFs if you want. It's essentially the way that we operate is sort of like like an ETF, if you will, because we buy properties and then they're in this trust, and then the dividends that we collect we then pay it out. So it just depends on what your strategy is and what your preference is. So we do like multi-let properties in terms of like your student accommodations, your break rooms, your multi-let type properties, communes and stuff like that. So it really just depends on a person in terms of what it is that they want to invest in. It also more personable in that we are like a WhatsApp and a call away, whereas maybe if you like investing into like a growth point or whatever, it might not feel as personal as belonging to a stokvel, for example. So I would say that's one of the reasons that maybe you want to.
Okay. And the entry points for both these platforms that you have in your stokvel, the lending portion and the trust portion, like what's the minimum entry points for those?
So it's 10,000 Rand for both options.
Okay, that's the minimum.
Then you can always top it up, like that's the minimum. But if you want to contribute more than that, you're always welcome to.
Okay, and how long have you been doing this?
Within Sakisiza Property Stokvel, we started in July of 2019.
Okay.
And so it's just, I would say about what 7. My maths is bad now.
For about 18 months or so.
It's about 18 months roughly.
Okay. All right.
You know,
And
and in that period, you know, the stokvel has really grown from strength to strength. You know, we won the Investor of the Year award, you
okay.
know, because of the way that we're doing stokvel. You know, we've been featured on multiple media. I mean, here we are with you. You know, we've been on the, you know, the private property podcast, I think 4 times already, you know, so, you know, industry, on TV, like on E-News, on SABC1 and all of those things. So people are actually realizing that this is a credible way to expose people to something. Because I mean, some of our members, you know, they start off in the stokvel and then they start actually, you know, realizing that they can do this themselves as
Yeah.
well. So then they start off on their own investment journeys. Because what we also do is that we have like what we call info sessions, and we invite guests to come and teach
Okay.
our members about a particular topic, you know, whether that's around, you know, the transfer process, buying property, you know, rental insurance, whatever it is, you know. So we always try and make it so that the people also feel that, you know, that's something they did want to
Getting
do.
value.
And obviously, you know, our members to be able to afford 10,000 rand, it's a certain target market, so
Yes.
they can actually then consider purchasing their own properties and all of that. So, you know, that's the ripple effect that we are having, in that we're not only saying, you know, just let's just contribute this money, but we're also creating other property investors within the ecosystem.
Okay. And long term, how do you see your specific Stockfeld? How do you see the role it plays for, the property investor in South Africa?
I think where we need to get into now is more the affordable housing and providing actual housing to South Africans. And I mean, the government cannot cope with solving the housing crisis in South Africa.
Yeah.
And that's the role that not only we can play, but other Stokvels as well. You know, looking at how can we provide a decent, affordable accommodation to like your average South Africans. You know, that's the real difference that we can make. So obviously, you know, as investors, as also from people who come from these communities, that's the sort of difference that we can make, where, you know, we're making a real impact and real change, not only from, you know, changing people's mind about what stokvels are and what they can do, but also in terms of just making real sustainable changes. Like, for example, right, I'm also like a stokvel coach now. So I actually coach other people who want to start their own stokvels and grow their stokvels. So I've got one of the people that I was actually coaching through the stokvel process, who her stokvel now is actually building schools in Limpopo. That was the first stokvel she started. You know,
Wow.
the second one is
Yeah.
now because people are actually realizing that instead of us taking the money and just um, buying series or paying funerals or just rotating it amongst ourselves, we can actually, you know, put our manage, but also make social and economic changes to our communities.
Community. Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. And Stockvels are known to be very informal. Is there a place for it to play with the big boys like Growth Points, Redefine, Vukela Properties?
You know, Yolanda, they started somewhere. You
Yeah.
know, they started somewhere, and now they're this conglomerate.
Mm.
You know, I'm inspired by the story of Wiphold. I don't know if you heard about them. You know, they started as a stokvel amongst women in the Eastern Cape, and they went all the way to being listed in the JSE.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no shame in humble beginnings. And even with us, when we started, you know, in a month we used to raise just over 100,000. Like when we started in 2019, be like 120, 130. Like last month in December, we raised 1.6 million rand in 1 month.
Yeah.
And that's like within roughly a year, just over a year. So you can imagine, you know, if we are able to pull those kinds of numbers,
Yeah.
what are we going to be able to achieve, you know, in 5 and 10 years time? And also, like I'm saying, that with the work that I'm doing now and sharing my lessons and all of those things, we're now creating other stokvels that can now also do that. So now we're creating this ripple effect in the economy, you know. So those are the kind of changes that we can make.
Yeah, no, that's some good changes. We can't completely depend on government, and it's nice to see, the private sector. In your case, you're making such a big impact in the community all over. All right.
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts for us?
I would say that, you know, you are thinking about starting a stokvel, do it. And I mean, don't just you're just sharing, you collect the money, you give it to Yolanda, you collect it and you give it to Susan, or whatever the case might be, even if that's the goal of your stokvel, but think about how can we have a portion of it and start thinking about what are some of, where can we invest it, even if it's just a passive investment like your ETFs, as you've mentioned, or if you want to get into the actual property business, go and buy land, build rooms. Now there's these container homes and these what they call these temporary homes,
Those
which
tiny
are
homes, yeah.
costing about 100,000 rand each. So look at, what I'm saying, probably providing those kinds of housing. So there's so many, buying flats in the CBD in Joburg, you can still find around the 200 mark. So there's so many options that you can start actually saying, at some point you stop putting money into your stokvel and your stokvel pays you. Our members get monthly income that we get from these different investments that we do. So it's not just the one where your money is just going out, because if your money is going out, you're not creating any sustainable wealth. It's not an investment. The investment must put money in your pocket. So start thinking outside of the box. Start thinking, where can we put our money so that our money can work for us and we actually earn income from the various investments. And it doesn't have to be complicated. You can start small and then work your way towards understanding or choosing a particular asset class that you understand, that you feel comfortable with, getting the knowledge, and then making sure that that starts working for your group. And you don't have to start big. I mean, for example, with easy equities, whatever you can start from is there's 1,000 rand. So you know what I'm saying. So if you guys, whatever you're contributing, 1,000 rand you take and you put towards something like that, so it can definitely start helping you working towards gaining a monthly income and growing an asset base.
Okay. All right, cool. But my concern with a stokvel would be, what am I investing in? What's the underlying asset? That's for me would be my concern. Like if I'm lending,
Yeah.
okay, I'm getting interest back, and then if I'm in the trust, I'm just a beneficiary. What's the underlying asset? How would that work?
So remember, a stokvel is a transient entity. In and of itself, it cannot, for example, I can't go and get a bond as a stokvel.
Yes.
I need to register a particular entity,
Yes.
whether that's a company or a trust, or you get what I'm saying. So,
Yes.
So essentially, that's why I was telling you earlier that in our lending stokvel, the individual members themselves are the taxpayers, because then they are the ones who are the holders of that underlying asset, like you're saying. So the stokvel itself, we're just putting the money together, and then it goes to the shares or ETFs, or it's property, or whatever it is that's your investment of choice. There's something that the stokvel itself can't hold the asset. It needs to go out of the pool and into a particular asset. And that is why in our instance, chosen the trust, which is going to be the holder of the asset, much like if we had even chosen a company. So there's no difference really, between the two. The company now owns, it would have owned that asset, and then the members would have been the
Shareholders of the company. Yeah.
So it's the that in a trust, shareholders are called beneficiaries because they benefit from the assets of that particular entity. So it's the same thing. We couldn't buy property in a stokvel because it's not a legal entity.
Yeah. All right.
So when you're joining a stokvel, you need to understand what is the end goal. What are we doing here? Hence you're speaking to what's the underlying assets.
Okay. But as isn't a trust, it has to pay a higher level of tax than a PTY, for example, in terms of their income.
Correct. If the income is retained in the trust.
Okay.
So the trust income is at 45%, which is quite higher than companies at 28%. And hence I said to you, that is why the income must be distributed to the beneficiaries, and then it's
in their hands,
taxable at the hands of the beneficiary using what we call a conduit principle.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. This has been so informative.
So if you're going to retain the income in the trust, it will be at 45%. And that's the point, that the income has to be distributed.
Okay, this has been great. It's been so informative. And I'm sure our viewers and our listeners have gotten so much of value. And if they want to reach out to you, they want some mentoring, or they want to get hands-on involved in your stokvel products or services, how do they do that?
They can find me on Facebook. I know my name and surname is a mouthful. They can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, Silindile Lisiane. They can also go to my website, www.meetsilindile. I don't know if you can write it somewhere, meetsilindile.com, so they can find me there as well. So yeah, those are some of the places where they can get hold of me.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to put all of these links that you've mentioned. I'm going to put it in the show notes. So it's going to be easier for people to just click the link and reach out to you that way.
Awesome.
All right, cool. Thank you so much for your time. You have an awesome day.
Thank you, Yolanda. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, so that is a Cylindela's perspective and her business, and she's making you a good offering on what you can invest in terms of property Stokvels in South Africa. So if you want to reach Cylindela, click on the links below. It's going to take you to a website. I also have a contact details down there as well if property Stokvels are your thing. Is it something for me? I'm not quite sure yet. I got to explore a little bit more. My concern is that when I invest in something, I got to own an underlying asset. And when there's question marks about that, I got to do tons more research. But thanks to Cylindela for helping us out and clearing up a lot of the fogginess around property investments for me in South Africa. And guess what? Cylindela is going to be speaking a lot more about property Stokvels at Financial Success Summit. So click the link down below in the description to get your hands on these tickets to Financial Success Summit 2021.